Continue our study in the book of Revelation this morning. We'll be in chapter 6 this morning. You'll turn your Bibles there, and I want to encourage you to be sure to take notes as far as even scripture references, if that's all you can do. It's very important to follow this out as you study. These references are very critical to understanding the scripture this morning. But we're going to start here in chapter 6, and we're going to be studying about these first of the seven seals. There'll be 6 of these 7 seals this morning in chapter 6. In Revelation 5, remember last week John saw a 7-sealed book in the right hand of the Father who sat on the throne. And a strong angel asked with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof?" That's in verse 2 of chapter 5. And when no one in heaven or on earth, under the earth, could be found, John began to weep, remember. And then one of the elders told him to weep not, because the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prepared to open the book and loose the 7 seals thereof. That's in verse 5 of chapter 5. And when John looked, he saw a lamb standing as it had been slain. And he witnessed the worship of the Lamb toward the end of that chapter 5 by the whole host of heaven. So that's kind of an outline quickly of chapter 5, leading into this chapter 6. In Revelation chapter 6 here, John sees the Lamb. He sees the Lamb open 6 of the 7 seals on the book or scroll. And the 7th seal will be opened in Revelation chapter 8 and verse 1. The companion passage, this is important for you to write down, the companion passage to the opening of the seals is found in Matthew 24, chapter 24, where the Lord Jesus gave a discourse to the disciples on end-time events. And after hearing Jesus say that the temple would be torn down and not one stone left upon another, they asked him in private, saying, "Tell us, when shall all these things be? When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" They asked that question in Matthew 24, verse 3. And so, of note here in Matthew 24 is that the disciples, what's important to note here, the disciples asked for one singular sign, not multiple signs, one singular sign. And it is not until Jesus is well within his answer to them that he gives the sign for which they were looking, and that's in the end of chapter 24, in verses 29 through 31. And so the sign can be found in the opening of the 6th seal. Here it is, chapter 6, in verses 12 through 17. Jesus responds to the opening of the 6th seal in this chapter 6. And Jesus' response to that, to the disciples' question, actually continues to the end of Matthew chapter 25. Now these go right along with this scripture here in Revelation chapter 6. A parallel can be noted here between the opening of the seals in chapter 6, here we're studying this morning, and what Jesus said in Matthew 24. Another significant passage to study in conjunction with that would be in Daniel chapter 9, verses 20 to 27. They go together. Daniel received a revelation concerning the 70 weeks of years, 69 of which have now been fulfilled, and the crucifixion, with the crucifixion of Jesus. Only 1 week now remains to be fulfilled. And this is the week of 7 years, commonly known as the tribulation period. And so the epicenter for the final 7-year period will be the city of Jerusalem. But the whole world is going to be affected at that time. And so at the end of the 7 years, Jesus will defeat Satan and the forces of Antichrist in the battle of Armageddon, and the millennial reign of Christ on earth will begin at the end of that tribulation period. But first, before all that happens, the seals on the 7-seal scroll must begin to be loosed. That has to happen first. This is the heart of our study here today. Some maybe interpret the opening of the seals in such a way to say that these things have already been occurred, or already have occurred. But I don't believe that. The things described in the opening of the seals are yet to be coming. They're future. Okay? They could, however, begin to unfold at any time. At any time that Israel has been regathered into the land, we know as the regathering has started. So we know the time is close. Revelation 6 describes the opening of the first 6 seals here. And Revelation 7 is an interlude between the 6th seal and the 7th seal, which results in the blowing of the 7 trumpets in the 7th seal. The blowing of the 7 trumpets will result in the pouring out of 7 vials or bowls, which consummate the wrath of God upon an unbelieving and ungodly world. The seals and the trumpets and the vial judgments of God are best viewed sequentially, or as happening in the order in which they are given in the book of Revelation. When we try to make a view of the seals and trumpets and vials and all that simultaneously, it's going to get confusing real quickly. Okay? And so, as we look into this chapter 6, in these first few verses, we see the opening of the first seal. We see the eyewitness here. I'm going to read these few verses. We say, "And I saw the Lamb open one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." The Apostle John was an eyewitness of the things that he saw here. He said, "I saw," 35 times in the book of Revelation. He was not depending on what others had said to him. He wasn't getting secondhand information. No, he saw for himself. And what he saw was the Lamb opening the first of the 7 seals here. He both saw and he heard. What he heard was one of the 4 beasts say, "Come and see," here in this first one. It was an invitation to look and to see. The word "come" is in an imperative, which is used in the text here. So you can say that it was a word of instruction, not merely just a word of invitation. Come and see. And so in verse 2, it talks about the white horse. "And I saw, and behold, a white horse. He that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." When John looked, he saw a white horse. He also saw an unnamed rider who had a bow, and a crown was given to him, it says here, and he went forth conquering and conquered. Now, some have suggested that the Lamb is the rider on the white horse. However, the Lamb is not the one riding the horse. He's the one opening the seal. Okay? And so we've got to understand what we're reading here. He is not the one riding on the horse. The Lamb will eventually come riding on a white horse, eventually, in Revelation 19 and verse 11. But this will not occur until the end of the tribulation period, when Jesus comes to engage the armies of Antichrist in the battle of Armageddon to establish his millennial reign over the earth. That's when that'll happen. And so the best commentary on the opening of the first seal here is to be found in Matthew chapter 25 chapter 24 in verse 5, where Jesus begins to answer the question posed by his disciples when he said this: "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." See, the greatest of all false Christs will be the Antichrist. Okay? Apparently, the opening of the first seal gives way to his arrival. This is the arrival of the Antichrist. According to Daniel's prophecy, the Antichrist will secure a treaty with Israel for 7 years. That's in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. And so the implementation of the treaty or covenant, what that will do is allow Israel the opportunity to once again offer sacrifices at the Temple Mount. This is something they are not allowed to do at this time today. Since the Temple Mount was controlled by the Muslims, today it's controlled by the Muslims and it's the side of the Dome of the Rock. So they can't offer those sacrifices there. Today, interestingly, Daniel's prophecy also reveals that the Antichrist will lead a confederation of 10 nations, 3 of which will be overcome in that process. As you read in Daniel chapter 7 and verses 7 and 8, in Daniel chapter 7, verses 20 to 25. And there's reason to believe here that the Antichrist coalition he's going to form will be made up of Islamic nations. The rider on the white horse will have a bow and a crown. He's going to go forth conquering. And to conquer, it says. And since there's no mention of arrows here, just a bow, the suggestion has been made that his victory will be a bloodless one. A bloodless victory. Read Daniel chapter 11, verse 21, which says this: He shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Okay? So the unbelieving world will welcome the arrival of the Antichrist and his proposal of peace. However, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. His real intent will be world domination and the annihilation of Israel. That's his real intention here. Many in Israel and in the world will be duped by false promises and platitudes of the Antichrist, also known as the man of sin, as you read in Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. There are some people today they're so desperate for peace that they'll believe almost everything and do almost anything to get it. Even so, it's that way the Apostle Paul warned, saying this: when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. That's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 3. So this leads us into the next seal, the opening of the second seal, in verses 3 and 4. And he says, and when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, Come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword. He said, Come and see, in that verse 3. When the Lamb had opened that seal, John heard the second beast also say, Come and see. As we will see, each of the four beasts, as described here in this chapter, each of the four beasts around the throne of God issue the same invitation, which is to come and see, in connection with the opening of the first four seals. And so with each invitation or command, a horse of a different color appears. First, a white horse appears, and then now a red horse. The red horse, we read in verse 4, he went out, then there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. So, he was given power to take peace from the earth, it says here. So, the peace that was intended and initiated here by the white horse is short-lived, in other words. It don't last long. It was a false or a counterfeit peace, if you want to say that, right. Just like the false Christ who initiated it.
Right.
And so everything Satan does, here's the point, everything Satan does or is a part of is counterfeit. The only one who can bring true peace is the Prince of Peace, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
He's the only one that can bring a true peace. Jesus is the one who gives peace like no other can give. When Jesus was on earth, he said this to his disciples, Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. That's in John 14 and verse 27. The pseudo-peace of the Antichrist will soon be broken. We see that in the second seal. Men will kill one another as the rider on the red horse is given a great sword, it says here in this verse 4. The opening of the second seal compares well with what Jesus said in Matthew 24 and verse 6. He said this to his disciples in that verse, And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So, while it is true that wars and rumors of wars have characterized the history of men since the time of Christ, we've had wars. And the wars and the rumors of wars spoken here are in response to the revival of the red horse in association with the opening of the second seal. This is going to continue. And that peace, false peace, will be broken. And we see here that these things are to be expected. They're coming yet. There's still going to be wars during this time. No one in his right mind wants war. Right. Nobody wants war. But all who are informed by the Bible knows that war will come. The world is not going to get better and better, as some people might think. Perilous times will come as evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse, as it says in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, 2 Timothy 3 and verse 13. So Satan may lure men and nations with the promise of peace and prosperity, but his ultimate goal is death and destruction, not life and happiness. Mm-hmm. So this is the lie of socialism and the lie of atheism. It promises one thing, but is bent on another. Okay? Terrible things are going on in the world right now. But it's only going to get worse, is the point. It's only going to get worse when the red horse appears on the world scene. The atrocities we see here, which men commit against one another, will only be multiplied. That thing we see today is only going to be multiplied when the second seal is broken. And so, such is the nature of man. He, like Cain, will rise up against his brother and take his life. Now it leads us into the third seal. In verses 5 and 6, opening of the third seal here, it says, "And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny. See thou hurt not the oil and wine." A black horse. The first horse was white. The second was red, and now the third horse was black. It was the Lamb who opened the first 2 seals, and it was the Lamb who opened the third seal. It was the third beast who announced the arrival of the third horse. John saw the third horse was black, and that the rider on the black horse had a pair of balances in his hand. The color black is associated with famine in the Bible, by the way. You read a reference to that in Lamentation chapter 5 and verse 10. Balances were scales which were used in ancient times. They were used to ensure that a buyer was getting an accurate amount for what he paid for. And so the law of Moses was really strict when it came to having true and accurate measurements. You read in the law of Moses. Without it, fraud would have been rampant. So in Deuteronomy chapter 25 and verse 13, he warned the Israelites saying, "But thou shalt have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure shalt thou have, that thy days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." Talks about accurate measurements. We see in verse 6 a voice. "And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. See thou hurt not the oil and the wine." So he heard the noise of thunder in connection, remember, with the first opening seal. In verse 1 of chapter 6. He heard a voice of the midst of the four beasts in connection with the opening of the third seal. The voice is not identified. but the fact that it came from the midst of the four beasts may indicate it was one of them. The voice said this, a measure of wheat, remember in this verse, a measure of wheat, verse 6, for a penny. A measure was he's talking about here was a dry measure, not a weight. Okay? And so in this instance, it was approximately a quart. Wheat was the most important grain in biblical times. It was used for bread and it was eaten parched. It was also used as a trade item. The references to corn in the King James Version are actually references to wheat many times. So we see here a quart of wheat would supply an average person one day substance to sustain them for one day. And so one person, one day, a quart. A penny was a denarius, or a silver coin equal to a laborer's daily wage. And so an entire day's wage for one quart of wheat would suggest here food prices about 12 times higher than normal at this time. The voice said, in 3 measures of barley for a penny. Barley was a grain known from early times in history. Barley was usually harvested before the wheat was planted in November or December. And so barley was used to feed horses and other stock, as you read 1 Kings 4 and verse 28. It was not normally eaten by the well-to-do, but was considered food for slaves and the very poor. They ate the barley. And they would mix it with whatever wheat they had had. And so the voice said, and see thou hurt not the oil in the wine. In other words, do not damage, waste, spill them, because they're precious and they're in short supply. The oil was olive oil. It was used to fuel lamps, anoint wounds, and to be sold commercially. Wine, it came from the fermentation of grape juice. The grapes themselves were produced on vines. Vines produced the fruit which was made into this wine. And the wine was drunk, but it was also used as a trade item, as you read in 2 Chronicles chapter 2 and verses 10 to 15. And it was used for medicine in Luke chapter 10 and verse 34, 1 Timothy 5:23. So the opening of the third seal compares well with Matthew 24 and verse 7, where Jesus said this, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. The result of war sometimes causes famine. It causes pestilence or diseases. This has been proven throughout history to be so. And it will only get worse when the third seal here is opened. So the effects of all this will be compounded, and it'll also be intensified by devastating earthquakes in various places around the world. History has proven this effect by earthquakes that causes these things. That leads us in, all this going on. Now it goes into the opening of the fourth seal in verses 7 and 8. He says, and when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast saying, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Hopefully I can get through this before we quit here. This is an important section of this chapter 6. When Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 24 about the sign of his coming, it goes right along well with the opening of the seal in chapter 6 here. And if this is if this is the case, it seems that when Jesus summed up the opening of the first 3 seals, saying, all these are the beginning of sorrows, he said in Matthew 24, verse 8. He did not classify them as the wrath of God, but as the beginning of sorrows when he said that. This phrase is a good description of the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. It was the beginning of sorrows. And so it reveals that, and this was prior to when the Antichrist will reveal his true character and nature. At this point in time, he's making peace, and he's starting to get control of the world. And so when the Apostle John heard the voice of the fourth beast, who said, "Come and see," here in verse 7, at that time John looked and saw a pale horse, in verse 8. The name of the rider on this horse was Death, and hell followed with him. John went on to say that power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. If this statement is to be understood in its most normal and natural sense, then 1/4 of the world's population is to be killed as a result of the opening of the fourth seal. What Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew 24 verse 9 was, "Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you. And ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake." Jesus then went on to describe what we understand as the revealing of the Antichrist at the midpoint of the tribulation period. When Jesus warned this, he said, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." That's in Matthew 24, verses 15 to 16. The reference to the prophecy of Daniel affirms that Jesus has this critical event in his mind here. At exactly the midpoint of the 7-year covenant, the Antichrist will put a stop to the offering of sacrifices on the Temple Mount. He'll desecrate the holy place. He'll say that he is God. He'll demand the worship of the world, and he'll initiate a fierce persecution of the people of Israel and all who name the name of Christ, which results in the death of many at this point. Daniel 9:27, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and the first 4 verses all reference to this. Please write these down and study these out. Very critical to understanding what's happening here. Jesus said, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22. The word translation could also be interpreted as persecution here. And Satan has attempted many times in history to extinguish the Jewish race. The Holocaust, remember, some 6 million Jews were killed. This indicates something much more worse than that's going to happen. So, I want to wrap this up this morning. I'd like to finish this out. There's so much more to give you here. Please study the rest of this chapter and the other opening of these seals. We'll lead into our chapter 7 next week. We'll begin to pick it up there in our study. But please use these references I give you this morning, and I think you'll find it a great blessing to you as you study these end times that we're studying. Thank you.